what my plan tonight is to basically have a quick chat about three different aspects of paddling that basically involve the club and club members. The big one is trip planning, because that's always on everyone's schedule, everyone's plans to try to get away for the summer and do at least one or two trips where they're overnights. Um, Another part of it is to introduce a little bit of the camping end of things that Paddle Canada um, has included. They introduced that about 5 years ago. And then finally, I'm just going to touch base on some ideas on how you can get better as a paddler, get better, get safer, and enjoy things. Make it fun, because whenever things are at the point where you're confident with what you're doing, it always becomes much more fun anyway. So let me just get started, and we'll start off with trip planning. Trip planning. A lot of it, especially if you're doing it with the club, begins at the club level, and that's organizing what needs to be done, making sure that there's an insurance, making sure we all know who the people are that are going on the trip, who the leader is going to be that's on the trip, that's going to take responsibility for it in terms of gathering everyone together, going over plans and everything else. So that's basically where the club fits in. Normally, what happens is someone comes up with the idea and the phrase, I think I want to go on a trip. So when they're thinking about this, there's a number of considerations that they have to make. And a lot of you, if not all of you, have already gone through this process, but I'll just go over it briefly. One, how long is the trip going to be that you want to take? When are you going to take it? Is it going to be in June, July, August? Or do you like colder water? Um, where are you going to go? And for how long? And another important consideration is who's going to go with you. Sometimes with the clubs, there's a choice, but not always, as to who comes along on the trips with you. It's basically first come, first serve, whoever signs up first, I would think. But in those cases, the big thing is making sure the people are at the skill level for the trip that you're providing. And that's where your table comes in, one ABCD to four ABCD, right? Where you know that the skill matches the level of the trip for sea state, for remoteness, for doing overnights, knowing how to pack a kayak. These are all important things. So once you decide on all of those items that I just listed, then it comes down to actually planning the group or planning the trip and finding out um, group input. As always is the case, the longer the trip is going to be, the more planning is going to go into it. And what that often means is the longer the trip, you're going to have more meetings. So if it's a 2 hour trip, the chances of having a meeting are pretty nil, but you're going to have your meeting at the beach when you're ready to launch, as opposed to a 7, 10, or 14-day trip where you're probably going to meet a number of times to go over all of the details involved with the trip. Because once you get going, you're gone for 10, 12, 14 days, and there's no coming back until you return. So you have to make sure that all of the details are done, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And that way everyone's going to be able to be on the trip and not feeling out of sorts at all. So it's up to the people that are basically involved in the trip to decide how many meetings, when and where. Um, how far out from the trip do you actually begin? I know some of my longer trips will start 6 months out. And that gives everyone a lot of time to get into the details, figure out what's needed, who's doing what, and all of that. You want to figure out roles. Normally, the person that presents the trip in the first place is going to be the administrator or the leader of the trip for the most part. But maybe look at what the backgrounds are of the people that are on the trip. Maybe you've got a nurse. Maybe you've got, doesn't have to be a chartered accountant, but maybe an accountant or something to help take care of expenses and budgets and everything else. Um, you might have an airline pilot who's brilliant in navigation. So these are all things to consider. And by divvying up the roles, it often helps lessen the load for one person and dividing it up amongst the group. And by doing that, everyone gets a feeling and an idea of sharing a camaraderie of taking the responsibilities that go into putting a trip together. Um, with planning the trip, there's four things basically that you want to look at. One is putting together a trip plan. Another one is putting together the route plan. Then there's the float plan. And then something that a lot of people don't use, but some do, is what's called a trip contract. Okay, and I'll get into that in just a few minutes. So what's involved with the trip plan? Trip plan, figuring out where the launch is going to be, how long you're going to be on the water, how long you're going to be on the trip, and getting home once it's all over. The route plan is putting together the actual route that you're going to take on the water. Okay, and included in that might be a plan B and a plan C, often depending on weather, depending on getting to a location that you thought was going to be a great campsite. And at high tide, it's completely covered over, so you'll have to move on to the next one. Yeah, so having options available in my work and business, especially with kayaking, sea kayaking, as some of you probably remember, if you've taken courses or clinics from me, one of my favorite words is options. Having something else available to take the place of something that's not working, at least for you. Um, Included in the route plan is often a detailed list of points that you're going to be going to, along with bearings, distances, and times. Um, when I'm teaching courses, that basically comes under the heading of dead reckoning. So dead reckoning is deduced reckoning. And what you're doing is you're usually using that for shorter distances, shorter than 1 nautical mile. Um, and you're just trying to organize what the direction of travel is going to be from point A to point B, how far it is, and how long it's going to take you to get there so that you've got a backstop of timing to make sure that you're not either going to overshoot or realize that you might not have reached that place yet. And then along with all of that on the route plan, you might want to make notes on hazards, campsites, as well as sites that you want to see when you're out there, and that are maybe historical and of interest to many of the people in the group. The float plan, this is your emergency plan basically, and it covers the details, the detailed info on the group, and it might include descriptions of gear, vehicle, kayaks, clothing, dry suits, PFDs, all of this stuff. It's going to include a list of who's in the group, what their skill level is, maybe such things as who knows how to use a radio, as well as what their MS or MN or MSSM numbers are. Knowing and listing emergency contacts and providing what the trip schedule is. And the most important part of that is when the expected return is, the date and the time, and what time you decide, if people haven't heard from you by a certain time on that date, whether they should be calling emergency services or whether they call a coordinator for the group who's left at home. Okay. Trip contract, as I say, not too many groups use this. It's often good for groups where not everyone is known to everybody else. And what that does is it allows everyone to provide what their individual expectations are while they're on the trip. Things like what time is everyone good for getting on the water in the morning? Some people are good for 4 o'clock in the morning. Others, hang on, I've got to have my coffee first and I've got to get my camp organized and this kind of thing. But if everyone chats about it, you can come to an understanding. And that's what it basically is, coming to an understanding amongst everybody to make sure that nothing's out of place and no one's going to get uptight or upset because someone's not doing something because they didn't expect them to do something. It gives us all an idea of what we want to see and do while we're on the trip. It might cover such things as cooking. Are we doing cooking as individuals? Are we doing cooking partnering up with somebody else? Or are we actually going to do group cooking? For myself, when I first got into this business of guiding, so I've got my Sea Kayak Guides Association certifications as well. I went on a couple of guided trips and I just watched and I took notes on what everything the guides did. And then I came back and I started to create my own trips. So many years ago when I first started, I was just doing the model that everyone else did, and that was providing food and everything else for all of my clients. Everything worked out fairly well for one season. And then the next season, all of a sudden people were starting to come with, I'm a vegan, I'm a vegetarian, I'm gluten-free, I have this kind of problem that I can't eat or anything along that. At that point, I said, everything's good, but you'll either have to pair up with somebody else that is of the same ilk as you in terms of what your needs are for cooking and eating, um, or it'll be individual plans. So that's the model that I've gone on with all of my tours. Everybody's responsible individually or gathering people together that have the same wants. And I find that just works out so much better. What else? Um, figuring out, especially on the longer trips, if you're going to include a rest day for everybody. Um, you don't have to be on the water every day. You can plan your route plan so that you're taking a day off, or you've got a couple of days in your back pocket that if people want to take a break at a certain point in time because all of a sudden you've discovered a beautiful beach, um, yeah, that people want to stay at and just camp a little bit longer, that's fine. You've got it. The other reason for holding a couple of days in your back pocket maybe is in case you have really bad weather, right? Um, Figuring out tides and currents and weather. Coming up with what I do with weather is I'll look at it a week out, 3 days out, and the night before we actually leave on the trip. Tides and currents, they're pretty easy to gather. It's just a matter of knowing what the locations are that you're going to be at, and if the actual um, tidal current station or anything else along those lines is going to have to change depending on where you are on your route. But you can have your tides and currents with you at all times. What I normally do, I try not to um, put all my faith into electronic gadgets such as cell phones or other things. Um, so what I'll do with the important things such as tides and currents and weather, excuse me, is I'll normally print them off before the trip, and I'll laminate them so that they'll be in my compartment, ready to pull out and have a look at on the morning that we're going to be going out on the water once again. Then some outside requirements, especially on the longer overnight trips that take some travel, making sure you know where everyone's going to meet at a certain date and time prior to the trip, where the accommodation is. Not everyone wants to stay at a hostel or at a hotel. Some want to just camp, which is just fine, but knowing where to meet for the launch site after that. And any ferries, schedules, and permits for that. A lot of people often leave booking ferries to the last minute. I'm doing a trip up onto the Central Coast, and everyone in the group, and it's a full group, they've all booked their ferries already. So this isn't going to happen until next August, but all of the ferries have been booked because it's a very restricted schedule that they've got up there. Some of the other things to think about are admin and responsibilities. Who's going to be doing what? This will include group payments. It's up to you to decide as to how you handle the payments, of course. Some groups, one person will be responsible for paying for everything, motels, ferries, all of this, permits. And then they will divide everything up and everyone will chip in their portion very shortly, either before or after the trip. Another big thing to consider is getting back to food. Who's going to be doing what? If you are part of a pairing or a group, making sure that everyone has the knowledge of which day they're cooking, what they're cooking. So you're not basically cooking the same things. You're not going to have beef stew 3 times in the 3 days that you're going to be out there. And shared gear. Sometimes it's good to have a list of all of the gear, and some of the gear that you don't use very often. You might want to say, okay, one person can bring this, person can bring this, one person can bring this, because it's not always necessary for everyone to bring all of the exact same gear. And then at the end of the trip, doing a trip review, as well as administrative and monies, making sure everyone is aware how much was spent and what their fair share was. And then doing a trip review, making sure that, especially with a club group, making sure that you know if there were any problems or anything along those lines that comes up that should be made note of so that people can access that at a later time. um, I was going to basically take questions, but it was suggested, and I agree with the suggestion. If you've got any questions about any of these 3 segments, just save them, make a note of them, and then we can have a discussion with them at the end of the presentation. So we're going to move on to camping now. Paddle Canada has, excuse me, 3 different levels of camping that they provide certifications for. One is camping basics, the other one is wilderness camping, and then the highest level of certification comes with camping leadership. All of these provide good information to people who are going on expeditions or overnight trips for front country, back country, and expedition camping. I'll go over a lot of the stuff that they're talking about, but the main ones that are of the most importance would be kitchen and cooking, campsite and gear, as well as some theory. When we're talking about kitchen and cooking, that's normally the first thing that I have my group's set up whenever we land at a spot and we're going to stay overnight. The kitchen has to be put up first with tarps over it, so that everyone is able to stay dry while they're eating and cooking. You have to figure out, once you get to the campsite, what area is going to be your cooking, what area is going to be for sleeping and camping, what area is going to be for a washroom use, and with mixed groups, where are the girls, where are the ladies going to go, where are the boys, where are the men going to go. What else? Um, a social area sometimes, not always the kitchen area, maybe it's the area around the campfire. If you're going to have campfires. Over the past few years, campfires have been sort of frowned upon, I guess, is the right phrase. Um, and a lot of it is based on the fact that parks people put a moratorium on using any fires in the parks area, or even in the backcountry period. They'll put a no campfires, campfire ban on. For us, we try to always obey what those orders are. In a lot of cases, though, it doesn't always apply to each and every area. So it's a good idea to look those up for where you're going with your trips. And even if campfires are allowed, always try to keep the campfire at a location that is below the high tide level. So between low tide and high tide. So that when high tide comes in uh, at night, it will wash everything away. Okay. Um, Knowing how to cook in the outdoors. Um, the big thing for me is knowing how to use your stoves, knowing how to make a campfire if a campfire is going to be used for cooking. And the big one is knowing which way is the wind blowing. And you'll want to think that one through before even setting up where your kitchen's going to be for the location that you're at. And by scent, what I'm talking about is whatever direction the wind is blowing, if it's possible to prevent that from blowing over your tents where you're going to be sleeping at night, that's always a good thing. Wild animals, they always follow scent, and that includes wolves, it includes um, mice. Mice are a big deal out on many of the islands. Um, but even bears, if you're in an area where bears are located, they'll always scent for food. And it's preferable not to have that scent flowing very nice aromatically over your tent for them to sniff. As I say, when we're teaching these courses, we go over the use of portable stoves and the many different types that there are. And we also like to look at the practicality of each of the stoves, both in terms of how efficient it is, what it's best to do, what it's best to cook. Maybe some aren't for cooking, they're more for just warming up water, for coffees and this kind of thing. As well as how loud are they? They can get pretty loud in some cases. We talk about campfires, we talk about permits, bans, locations of the campfire where they should be. We've already discussed that. Then we talk about how to stay safe while making a campfire. Um, so that gets into the use of knives, axes, and saws. And we also talk about the different styles of campfires that there are that you can make, be it from a log house to a teepee style to a tunnel style. So lots of different things that we discuss on those courses. Um, Many of you I know already go out and you've got tons of years of experience of camping in the outdoors, and you've all got your favorite ways of making campfires. So that's fine. We talked about safe drinking water. Do you always carry all of your water with you on the trip, which can be weighty as well as taking up a lot of space in the kayak? Or do you actually filter water when you're out on the trip from a river or something, another source that's available to you? A big part of the camping end is menu planning, um, knowing how to figure out how many breakfasts you're going to have, how many lunches, how many dinners you're going to have while you're out on the trip, what you're going to need for snacks, be it midday or otherwise, how you're going to uh, do those things. Are all of your lunches going to be cold? For myself, I like to heat up a bowl of soup for lunch in a lot of cases. So I'll always have my stove available for me. So this influences how you're actually going to be packing your kayak as well. So whenever I'm out on a day trip or whenever I'm out, knowing that I'm going to be eating lunch on a beach other than where we are going to be staying, I'll normally have my stove fairly close at hand, be it in the day hatch area, as well as the water and the meal items that I'm going to need for that same meal. We talked about food preparation and storage, and along with that, of course, comes personal hygiene, knowing how to try to stay safe and keep the bacteria count down as much as possible. Storing food in your kayak, keeping it fairly close to the bottom of the hull where the cold water is, especially for items that tend to spoil faster than other items. Um, and then knowing how to actually prepare the food once you're at the campsite. If you're going to actually be cutting up raw vegetables, if you're going to be having anything to do with meat, chicken, beef, fish, anything along those lines. And what you're doing for appetizers. I know with a lot of our groups, where we're cooking for the group itself, the meals consist of whoever's responsible that night is in charge of appetizers and the main meal and dessert. So being able to keep things fairly simple but still tasty is always a good consideration. For myself, I do nowadays a lot of dehydration. Okay. Many of my meals are completely dehydrated, um, other than probably the first 3 to 4 nights where I can actually have fresh meat or fresh whatever. That's not going to spoil if it's not dehydrated. Um, a big one for longer trips is management of trip garbage. So I got it down to the point now with the dehydrating where I'll have a smaller Ziploc bag, regular one that you'd like, you cut an onion in half, stick the half onion that you don't use back in the fridge, but you put it in that Ziploc bag. So I basically on a 1 week trip, I will have one, maybe two of those Ziploc bags of garbage, and that's basically it for me. Um, but that comes down from experience and knowing packaging of food and other materials that you're going to be using and knowing how small you can make it. The other part of that in terms of trip garbage is if you are using or able to use a campfire, knowing what you can put on the campfire to get rid of it. What else? We talk a lot about the campsite setup, and I've already talked about that. Kitchen, where the tents are going to be set up, storage, wash up, as well as bathroom area. So we've already talked about all of that basically. You're going to try to keep them separate and in the bathroom end of things, fairly private. Um, all of you, I think, I don't know if anybody has not gone on an overnight trip, but you learn pretty quickly about sanitation, how to create using a trough, a cat hole for going to the washerman, um, or using a boom box. I know up north they use boom boxes quite a bit. Um, but knowing how to deal with and the disposal of your own personal excrement. A lot of it can also be done uh, down on the beach if you set aside a certain part of the beach for this, preferably 100 to 200 meters away from anywhere that people are and they're going to be using. But in those cases, the tides will take most of that away for you. So it's not a big deal. The big thing that I normally do when I approach a beach is I look for little sticks that are sticking straight up because that normally indicates for us as guides that someone has gone to the washroom there and not to dig there or to do anything that you might not want to do. Um, in terms of camp takedowns, you can always refer back to the leave no trace list of 7 different items. I'm not going to go through the items with you, but for me with the camp takedown, it's making sure fires are out. It's making sure they're um, redistributed so that it doesn't look like it's an actual fireplace. Same thing with the kitchen. You're going to find a lot of places. God's Pocket is a great example of it, where in 2 out of the 3 main campsites, there have been kitchen tables and chairs and stuff that are available for you to use. But if you get to a location where nothing like that is available, by the end of the trip and by the time that you finish leaving, it should look the exact same way as what it did when you first arrived. And that is leave no trace. You're not wanting people to get to a spot and think, oh, others have been here and why didn't they leave a table for us? This kind of thing. Um, tent and tarp setups are very big for me. Um, over the last 3 years, I've actually switched from using tents to simply using tarps now. So I'll have a tarp overhead to keep water out should it be raining in any way, shape, or form. And then I'll use a second tarp to actually make the place that I'm going to be sleeping under. Um, so it's been a lot of fun. Using a tent, I found got a little bit boring and everything else. So I wanted to try to push myself a little bit. And so now I'm just going out on a 7-day or 14-day trip with 2 tarps and my bedding and stuff like that. So it's been an interesting experience because yes, I have been flooded out once or twice and it's not been a lot of fun, but you learn from that and you move on and you change everything up and you adjust accordingly. Um, with tent and tarp setups, it's basically more than just setting your tent up. It's looking to see where you are with the ground. Are you in a hollow? Are you in a indentation where the water can gather? Or are you on a slight incline where the water can drain off and not gather? Uh, so drainage is a big thing. And then knowing what kind of style of accommodation that you want if it's not a tent. If it's a tarp, are you going to use a center line? Is it going to be freestanding? Is it going to be a parachute model? All of these different things. And it's a great idea if someone in the club can, at some point in time in the spring, prior to everyone starting to go out on these overnight trips, to actually go over such things as how do you set up your tent? What are you looking for where you set up your tent? And you have the members who are attending that presentation or that practical clinic, we'll call it, actually bring their tents and go through it and make sure that everything's working with their tent. There aren't any repairs that are required or anything like that. Um, learning or reacquainting themselves with what knots to use when they're setting up their tent or their tarps. Um, which knots are going to be best for tying to a tree, for freestanding. How do you do a slip knot? What kind of prussics are going to be used for their um, center lines, this kind of thing. And one of the things that I don't see too many people do, but when I'm out in the very far remote areas, I will set up what's called a perimeter line. And what that is a line that basically goes around my tent or tarp by about 15 feet, 10 to 15 feet away, so that if an animal is scrounging around, I'll have either a can or a bell on the lines. So that if it rings, I know something's out there and I can prepare myself that way for that. So that's called a perimeter alarm line. Um, Making sure that you've got all of the right clothing and other gear for whatever it is you're doing on that trip itself. Um, whenever we're on a trip and we're going to be staying more than one night at any one location, what that normally means is on the day after we get there, we're going to go out on a day trip and explore the areas all around. What I will always do when we're doing that is I will always have an emergency kit with me, and that emergency kit includes a tarp, a stove. It doesn't necessarily include bedding because the emergency itself is going to be anywhere from 12 to 36 hours. And when you're out on the water, you're going to be wearing your dry suit anyway. So you might as well get used to it because it's going to be your best friend if you're having to camp overnight in an emergency situation. So I always wear my dry suit at that point in time. What else? Can't see anything. The prior to going out on any of your overnights, take the time to go over all of your gear. Okay, make sure that your tent poles are all solid. There's no cracks in them. They're not broken in any way. There's no tears in your tent cloths. And the same thing with all of the rest of your gear. Just have a good look at it and make sure it's in proper condition and it's not going to fail you when you want to use it. Um, what we normally cover in camping as well as on many of the Paddle Canada courses, as many of you have already learned by taking courses from different instructors, is not only learning how to do the trip planning, but uh, getting your navigational skills a little bit more tuned up, which is a good thing to do. Um, Understanding the impact that camping has on our coastlines, on the islands that we stay at, on the beaches that we stay at, is always a good thing. Making sure that you're able to put them back in the same order that you found them in. For me, with my company, risk awareness and management is huge. Making sure people know what the risks are, knowing how to mitigate the risks, how to lower the risks, how to manage them better. And in the event that anything of major significant actually happening, knowing how to solve that, how to resolve it, um, how to take care of it. The biggest thing for me that's ever happened is one of my students, when we were practicing, what was it, high bracing, decided to really push his limits and he ended up knocking his shoulder out. So he dislocated his shoulder. Um, it's the first time in 15 years, basically, that I've ever had to call for outside help because we're way up on the north end of Galliano Island at the campsite up there. And so we did a call, not really a mayday call, but just a call for help. because everything was fine other than his shoulder was dislocated. And the next thing that we know is the Richmond Seafarer hovercraft is pulling up on our shore 20 minutes later because they were doing some training just off in the main strait there. And they took him, they took his kayak, they took his gear and took him back to Richmond. They kept all of his gear at the Coast Guard station. They had an ambulance take him to hospital. He was all set to go in about 3 hours after he got to hospital. So it was an interesting experience for me, but it's one of those things where I always prepare for it. And by being prepared, that probably helped reduce the amount of time and the decision making hugely. Um, if you're not prepared for it, you don't want to have people scrambling and trying to say, "Oh, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now?" Not a good thing. So you want to try to uh, prepare and cover for as many different possibilities for risk that you might happen. One of the best things that you can do when you're planning the trip is as you're putting your route plan together and you're using charts, check out the charts. See what they have to say. Is the coast full of boulders or is it a nice sandy beach area? Are there overfalls under the water where if you're in a major flood current, there's going to be some large current? I'm just thinking of Skookumchuck. I don't know. Knowing where you are and what the different risks are that you might encounter. A lot of the accidents that happen are not on the water. Once again, they are at the campsite. Um, Broken bones, sprained ankles, same thing with hands and fingers, cuts with knives, axes, um, burns from the fire or from stoves, grabbing a hot plate. Um, just knowing how to deal with those and being prepared for them. That's a big thing. Um, Understanding heat and cold issues. As you've all heard many times, I'm sure, we don't prepare for the temperature. We prepare of the ambient air. We prepare for the temperature of the water. The water out here, it actually can get fairly nice and warm, right? You'll get up to 20, 21 Celsius in English Bay sometimes at the height of summer. Um, in the winter right now, it's about 6 degrees, 7 degrees, if that. If you're out on the actual west coast, it can be anywhere from 2 degrees in the winter all the way up to probably um, not much more than 14 degrees, I wouldn't think. So if you're in the water for any length of time, 14 degrees can start feeling very cold. So just make sure you are properly prepared for that clothing wise, as well as how to deal with it if you happen to come across someone that is suffering from either hyperthermia or hypothermia, right? Um, Hyperthermia can happen basically at any time. We were up at Paradise Beach up on Brooks Peninsula one summer, and we arrived there, and for 3 straight days, it was 33, 31 to 34 degrees. And we were up there for 10 days, and we went through half our water in 3 days. So it was just something to keep in the back of your minds. Um, Respect wildlife. Try to know what kind of wildlife you might expect in an area that you're going to be camping. It up here in BC, you're looking at wolves, bears as the big ones. Um, Possibly we get back to the small ones, the mice and the rodents and this kind of thing. Sea otters don't normally come to the land. Seals do, and some other little creatures like weasels and mink. They'll be there. Um, knowing what kind of animals there are is really helpful, so that you're prepared for it. One trip that I was on up in, where was it? The Bunsbys, I think it was. And I got up in the morning and I went out to a point to have a pee. And out on the point, it was mesmerizing because there's a wolf out there. And she was just looking back at me as I was looking at her, and we were watching one another. And then my co-guide, I hear in the background say, Mike, just so you know, that one's mate is right behind you 20 feet away. So we had to be very careful. I wasn't even thinking about looking over my shoulder at the time. So yeah, just being aware of your area and what's going on. Um, I think the last note that I'll make on the camping end of things is being prepared for sun and the heat more than anything else. Knowing how to take care of your skin, how to take care of yourself, making sure that you remain hydrated throughout the trip. So the last topic that I'm going to talk about is personal development. So these are all my ideas. No, no one else other than general knowledge, basically. Um, so my idea on personal development is very simple. It's to become a better paddler each and every time you get out on the water. Very simple. One of my favorite phrases that came out of coaching, and I was coaching hockey for a long time. I was coaching swimming for a long time. And that was become better than your best. So that would be your goal every time you get into your sport or your situation that you're working on, becoming better than the last time you were out there. So how do you do that? For me, the big one is practice, practice, practice. So you go out on the water and you're going to ask yourself, okay, where are my weak points, or how can I better develop my stronger points? What I tell a lot of my students, um, actually all of my students during any of my courses, and that's Mike's 10-minute practice routine. So what that is I tell them, when you are ready to go out on the water, and it doesn't matter whether you're there for a clinic, it doesn't matter if you're there for a course, and it doesn't matter if you're there just for a group paddle with other club members. If you can, try to get out on the water at least 10 minutes before the start date of whatever it is you're there for, and spend those 10 minutes practicing one thing and one thing only. When you're first starting to paddle, that one thing will be very general. I want to practice my backstroke. So you're going to spend 10 minutes practicing your backstroke, trying to get the right technique, because there's no point in practicing anything 10,000 times if it's the wrong technique, right? It'll just take you that much longer to get out of the bad technique. So know what the right technique is, and then make sure you practice that, and you build up your timing. So you start off slow, you build it up so that you're faster. And you might do that 3, 4, 5 times when you go out on the water. So 5 times in a row when I go out on the water, I'll practice my backstroke. So as I said, when you're starting off, you're just thinking, let's practice backstroke. As you get better, you're going to start thinking about, okay, what am I going to concentrate on with my backstroke? Am I going to concentrate on what are my arms doing? What path are they taking? And then concentrate on that. And then it gets down to silly little things. I had a conversation with, uh, I forget his first name, Gordon, from Great Britain. We were out teaching an instructor course together. And he and I got onto a conversation about, okay, what are we going to teach with regards to um, turns? And Gordon said something along the lines of, well, we'll do a just a front turn using your paddle and sticking that down in the water. So that was the instruction. So we actually spent 3 hours with instructors just on this one thing. We would call them in after 20 minutes and change up what they were concentrating on. And it would start off with, okay, just feel your stroke, and then it's know the path of your stroke. What are your hands doing? What are your wrists doing? And then moving on to what is your head doing? What are your feet doing? What are your knees and legs doing? But every time that there's an instruction, it specified a certain part of that technique. So this is something that you might want to do and get the members of the club to practice as well. I just find being able to practice that kind of thing is so much helpful in terms of developing an actual skill and the technique for that skill. Um, as I mentioned to you before, one of my favorite words when I'm teaching is the use of options. For me, options means providing people with a set of skills that have the same goal in mind, but from that set of skills, they are able to decide what works best for them. Everyone's different. Guys versus gals, tall people versus short people, um, people who have a medical issue or another issue, say with their back or with their head or with their neck. There might be uh, the average age of a kayaker is what, 55, 60 years old. Arthritis is a large part of that. So are they dealing with that? What is the skill that you're teaching, or what is the skill that you're practicing that best fits that one person? Okay, because if you're doing, say, side draw strokes, we're teaching, when we first start off, we're teaching two ways, and then as we get up in the higher levels, we're teaching 3, 4, 5 ways of doing it. And people from those options are able to choose what works best for them. What skill and technique make it the most efficient for how their body can handle that option. Does that make sense to everybody? Um, the last part of the practice part is gather information from multiple mentors and instructors on what they see you needing to practice. If they're at a higher level, get their advice, get their thoughts. They might not always be right, so be prepared for that, but hopefully they are 90% of the time. But go to different people that you respect, that you know, have a lot of time on the water, that train at higher levels, and get their ideas. And by that, I mean, I always tell my students, do not get stuck taking courses from one person, because you're always going to get the same perspective. It's always good if you take, say, a level 1 course from somebody, take a level 2 course from somebody else, because you'll get a different perspective, you'll get some different direction. Something else might click with you and say, oh, that's much better than what such and such provided. But from such and such, the other instructor, they might have provided you some great information on doing something else as a skill or technique. So the more people you can get and gather information from, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Think about how and why you're doing something the way you're doing it. Okay. So this comes down to questioning technique more than anything else, and questioning what your abilities are. You're going from theory to practical use. What'll often happen for me is thinking of coming up with a different way of doing that skill. Okay. um, we've all done and practiced and taught forward stroke at some point in time or another. All of you are experienced paddlers, and at some point in time, you'll either have had someone who doesn't quite have as much experience as you, either looking at you to see how you're doing a forward stroke, or asking your advice. Why are you doing that? And this kind of thing. And then you get out on the water and you start asking yourself those questions too. And part of that is there a way of making this more efficient? And one of the questions that I get so many times is, Mike, I go out with the group and I find I have trouble keeping up with them. I feel I'm doing everything exactly the same as everybody else on the forward stroke. And I'm trying to take into context the differences of my kayak, the differences of my paddle and everything else, but I just can't keep up with them. So for me, I would go out and I'd start questioning myself, okay, how can I provide advice for someone to make their forward stroke more efficient, less tiring, but they're able going to keep up and maybe surpass the people that they've been having trouble staying up with all this time. One of the things that came out of that was developing an actual different paddle path through the water. So what was happening with a lot of the strokes that people were taught is you put it in by your knee, you pull it out by your hip, right? For the Greenland paddle, you put it in by your knee and you pull it out when your hand gets to your hip, not your paddle blade. So if everyone's doing that and I'm still falling behind, my question to myself was, how can I make sure that my paddle has longer contact with the water? And out of that came a look at how swimmers did their forward stroke with their arm movement and hand movement through the water. And it ends up being an S path where the hand or the blade goes into the water by the kayak, and then it's pushed out away from the kayak, it's drawn back into the kayak, and then it's pushed out behind. So what you've done, in fact, is you haven't changed the actual distance from bow to stern that your paddle is going, but you've changed the amount of distance that it goes in by creating that S path. So it's in the water longer, it's got contact longer, and it's now pushing the water longer. So you've actually got um, a longer, more efficient paddle blade push in the water than the others do. And that's helped a number of people in terms of being able to keep up more than anything else. So taking time to question what your techniques are, what works for you and what doesn't. Of course, I'm going to say take courses and clinics. This is where it comes back to the club and having skilled paddlers who've got experience and who have taken courses, have the proper techniques, and are able to pass those on to others in the club. And it doesn't have to be your Paddle Canada certified level 4 or level 3, or you're an instructor trainer, or you're an instructor. But if you can make sure that your techniques are right and then step up within the club in positions of leadership where you can pass on what those skills are, I think that's hugely important for club development and member development in terms of getting everyone better and to a higher level where the safety's there, the confidence is there, and they're feeling really good about being able to get out for longer paddles. As I said earlier on, there's no point in practicing the wrong way. So make sure technique is correct for whatever skill that you're doing. And as I just mentioned, for me, a big thing with the clubs is having the more experienced paddlers step up into positions of leadership. Doesn't always have to be on the water, but that's what we're basically all there for, right? We're there to get into our kayaks, grab our paddles, and go for a paddle on the water, be it for half an hour or be it for 2 weeks. So if you can, take clinics and courses as your experience gets better. When your experience is getting up there, provide the opportunity for some of the people that don't have as much experience as you to give them the courses and the clinics that they're looking for, and know what the people are, what the people are looking for. Ask them, see what things they're wanting the club to do. Are they wanting the club to provide a clinic on doing turns? Are they wanting to, um, something that a lot of people don't practice, towing, right? How do I tow? Do I have the right equipment? Do I know, this is a big thing. Do I know how to use that equipment? And that's just not for towing. It's for anything. It's for putting your PFD on properly. It's for knowing how to hold your paddle properly. All of these different things, right? Um, yeah, as club members get better, you get better and the club gets better. So I think that's all really good. The last thing that I would put out there is, if you're getting to the point where your skill set is becoming good and you're getting confident and you're wanting to develop even more, if you've already taken some skills courses with Paddle Canada, I would highly recommend thinking about becoming an instructor. And I'm not saying that so that you're going to feel you end up at the club having to instruct everyone all the time, because that's not the point here. The point is to provide your skills, your skill sets with people of the club and have it dispersed amongst all of the more expert paddlers within the club. But the big thing that I think I got out of becoming fairly high level instructor is, the more I, excuse me, the more I learned to instruct, the more I learned. the You're always questioning, you're always getting questioned by your students, which is always interesting. Why are you doing it that way? um, so it makes you think more about everything that you do on the water. And as an instructor, you'll just help the club and the members immensely, and everyone will benefit from it.